You ever stop and think about how the biggest companies in the world, the ones that sell you phones, coffee, or your favorite streaming show, actually pay their taxes? I mean, they operate everywhere, all at once. Well, it turns out there's this complex, kind of invisible set of rules that governs the whole thing, shaping our entire global economy. Okay, let's get into it.
So this is really the big question we're tackling. When money is zipping across borders every single second, how on earth do countries decide who gets to tax it and how much they get to take? The answer, as you'll see, is this fascinating puzzle of international agreements, clever loopholes, and legal creativity.
All right, so before we jump into the solutions, we first have to wrap our heads around the fundamental problems that this whole globalized world created for tax systems. And really, it all boils down to two huge issues that are, weirdly enough, complete opposites. So on one hand, you've got double taxation. Imagine a company makes some money in one country and gets taxed on it, and then gets taxed on that same money again back in its home country. It's a massive roadblock for international business. But then, on the complete flip side, you have tax avoidance, where really smart companies find the gaps between different countries' rules to pay next to nothing in taxes anywhere. So the billion-dollar question is, how do you solve both of these problems at the same time? Well, the main answer countries came up with was to create this huge web of one-on-one agreements. You can think of it as the official, shared rulebook for how this whole international tax game is supposed to be played. These agreements are called tax treaties. The formal name is a mouthful, double taxation avoidance agreements. But their goal is actually pretty simple, just to provide clarity. They spell out exactly which country gets the right to tax what, which stops that whole double taxation nightmare and gives businesses the confidence they need to invest across borders. Now, to really get how these treaties work, you just need to know the two main players in any transaction. First, there's the source country. That's where the business activity actually happens, where the money is made. And then you have the residence country. That's the taxpayer's home base. The entire point of a tax treaty is to manage the tug-of-war over taxing rights between these two. But just like with any rule book, the real problems start when the players on the field start interpreting those rules in different ways. And this is where things get really, really interesting and pretty complicated. It's something called an income characterization conflict. Basically, it's when two countries look at the very same payment and call it two totally different things. One country says, hey, that's a royalty, while the other says, no way, that's a business profit. And why does that tiny difference in wording matter? Oh, it matters a lot, because under a treaty, those two things are taxed in completely different ways. Let's use a classic example to make this crystal clear. Picture a big tech company from the United States. They license their software to a company that's based in Indonesia, and the Indonesian company sends them a payment for it. Simple enough, right? Well, this is where it gets tricky. Indonesia might look at that payment and say, hold on, that's a royalty for using our intellectual property, and according to our treaty, we get to tax that. But the US could come right back and argue, nope, that's business profit from selling a product, and the treaty clearly says that only we, the residence country, can tax that. So what happens when you have this kind of standoff? Well, you guessed it. It leads to one of two bad outcomes. Either the company gets taxed twice, once in Indonesia, once in the US, or this very confusion creates a perfect little loophole that a clever company could use to avoid paying tax on it at all. We're right back to those two core problems we started with. So how do you fix a mess like that? Thankfully, the treaties have a kind of referee system built in. It's called the Mutual Agreement Procedure, or MAP for short. The company can basically ask its own tax authority to get on the phone with the other country's tax authority, and then the bureaucrats from both sides have to negotiate and hash it out until they reach a compromise. Okay, but simple disagreements are one thing. What happens when companies are actively hunting for these loopholes to save money? Well, that's when we get into this nonstop global game of cat and mouse between multinational corporations and governments. And this brings us to a really key concept: anti-tax avoidance. It's so important to get this right. This is not the same as tax evasion, which is straight up illegal. Tax avoidance is different. It's the art of using legal loopholes to shrink your tax bill. So anti-avoidance rules are the government's way of trying to close those loopholes to make sure companies are paying what they fairly owe. And this breaks down some of the most famous plays in the corporate playbook. You've got profit shifting, where a company in a high-tax country pays way too much for something from its own sister company in a no-tax country, moving the profits over. The countermove? Transfer pricing rules. Then there's thin capitalization, loading up a subsidiary with tons of debt from the parent company to create massive tax-deductible interest payments. The defense? Rules that cap how much debt you can have. And my favorite? Treaty shopping, setting up an empty shell company in a country just to take advantage of its great tax treaty. The defense for that? A special clause that basically says you have to have a real business there to get the benefits.
Look, all these individual rules are a good start, but you can't just play whack-a-mole when the problem is global. That's why the world's biggest economies, through the OECD and G20, launched this absolutely massive coordinated attack on the problem, called the BEPS Project. That stands for Base Erosion and Profit Shifting.
And when I say this thing was massive, I mean it. This wasn't just one new law. It was a package of 15 key actions, each one designed to surgically repair a specific loophole in the global tax system. It was, without a doubt, the biggest overhaul of international tax rules in almost a century. So, we've talked about all these complex rules and treaties and countermeasures, but if you look underneath it all, there's one final, fundamental principle that's holding the whole structure together. And that principle is, simply, fairness.
It's known as the non-discrimination principle. It sounds a little fancy, but the idea is incredibly simple. A country is not allowed to treat a foreign company worse than it treats its own local companies. You can't just slap a higher tax rate on a business just because it's from somewhere else.
And here's what that looks like in the real world. If a Japanese company sets up a shop in Indonesia, the Indonesian tax authorities have to let it deduct normal business costs, like salaries and rent, in the exact same way an Indonesian company would. The whole point is to create a level playing field, which gives foreign investors the confidence to bring in money and create jobs, what we call foreign direct investment.
So when you strip away all the jargon and the complexity, this is what it's all about. Every single one of these rules, from preventing double tax to fighting avoidance to ensuring fairness, it's all designed to build a predictable, stable system that lets global trade and investment flourish. So how do the treaties actually stop the double tax from happening in practice? Well, they usually use one of two main methods. With the credit method, you basically get to subtract the taxes you paid overseas from the tax bill you owe at home. The exemption method is even more straightforward. Your home country just agrees not to tax your foreign income at all. Different paths, but they both get you to the same destination, no double taxation. Which, of course, leaves us with the one final crucial question for the future. You see, this entire system of rules we've been talking about, it was designed for a world of factories, shipping containers, and physical goods. But today, the most valuable things are algorithms, data, and brands that exist in the cloud. So the real question is, can a system built for the 20th century possibly keep up with the 21st? Or are we on the verge of needing a whole new rulebook for the digital age?